Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Xizhi. Coming up in this edition, North Korea says it will completely cut off roads and railways connected to South Korea starting from Wednesday. Southeast Asian leaders are gathering in the capital of Laos for an annual regional forum. And Israel continues to expand its ground offensive against Hezbollah, deploying a 4th Army Division into southern Lebanon. We begin in Asia. North Korea has said it will completely cut off roads and railways connected to South Korea starting from Wednesday and fortify the areas on its side of the border. The General Staff of the Korean People's Army says this is in response to military exercises in South Korea. The South Korean Joint Chiefs of Staff said North Korea's measures will only lead to harsher isolation. And China said maintaining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula requires efforts from all sides. Jack Barton has more from Seoul.
The plan is to cut off all road and rail access and to do it within the next few days. Of course, the roads aren't operable at the moment, nor is the rail service. They are in effect cut off. But what the DPRK says they're going to do, it seems, is destroy those sections of road and rail and then build military fortifications around that area so that the area can't be passed in the event of a conflict with South Korea. This is probably not a surprise given the DPRK has really been moving down this path since last December when Kim Jong-un talked about formalizing the DPRK and the Republic of Korea, or South Korea, as two separate states, instead of, as it's been seen, one country that has been divided with both sides seeing the other as illegitimate. And that's the way, of course, South Korea still views the DPRK, but the DPRK moving forward with plans to formally recognize South Korea as a separate country and itself as a separate country. And it's taken steps like blowing up the inter-Korean communications office inside the DPRK that was just above the DMZ. They did that last year, and there's lots of other steps in that direction. And it comes just after a Supreme People's Assembly meeting at which Kim Jong-un spoke at length about this sort of process of really dividing the Koreas into two states and saying in it that, the DPRK would follow its building up of nuclear arms. It would take a heavy stance if it were attacked. It would try and forcefully suppress South Korea if there were a war, but at the same time also saying the DPRK had no plans for a war with South Korea. And in fact, Kim Jong-un sort of making statements as if to say he didn't even want to think about the place. So these seem like very heavy moves, but in effect it is sort of recognizing reality. And the statements that are coming with it aren't that bellicose.
That was Jack Barton reporting in Seoul. Southeast Asian leaders gathered in the capital of Laos on Wednesday for an annual regional forum, the ASEAN Summit. The 10 ASEAN member countries will also hold talks with their dialogue partners from elsewhere in the region, including China, Japan, South Korea, India, Australia and New Zealand. Rian Melser reports from Vientiane.
Well, they're obviously concerned about some global headwinds, such as any slowdown in their key markets and, of course, the turmoil, the conflict in the Middle East and Ukraine. But the ASEAN leaders meeting this week have plenty to be optimistic about. The projections are that the average growth for the region will be about 4.5% this year, with strife-torn Myanmar at the low end and Vietnam, Indonesia and the Philippines at the high end, with Vietnam having experienced 7.4% growth in the last quarter, so very encouraging. As well, all the countries, with the exception of Myanmar and Laos, have reined in inflation. It's all at the lower single-digit levels. And with the US lowering interest rates, that's seen regional currencies rise, with, for instance, Malaysia's currency at one point being the best performing currency on earth and still currently the best performing currency in Asia this year. On the sidelines of these leaders' meetings is the ASEAN Business and Investment Summit. That has seen speeches and panel discussions involving several ASEAN prime ministers and presidents, as well as prime ministers from New Zealand and Canada. And one of their key focuses is on the digital transformation of the ASEAN region.
That was Rian Melser reporting on the ASEAN Summit. Meanwhile, Chinese Premier Li Qiang is attending the China-ASEAN summit in Laos and paying an official visit to the Southeast Asian country. He will also join the ASEAN Plus 3 summit and the East Asia summit in the capital Vientiane. Moving on to the Middle East. Israel is continuing to expand its ground offensive against Hezbollah, deploying a 4th Army Division in southern Lebanon. On Tuesday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israeli airstrikes had killed 2 successors to Hezbollah's slain leader Hassan Nasrallah. Meanwhile, the Israeli military said Hezbollah fired 135 rockets into Israel by mid-afternoon Tuesday, causing damage. A top Hezbollah official said the group is no longer demanding a truce in Gaza as a condition for reaching a ceasefire in Lebanon. The Lebanese Health Ministry said Tuesday that 36 people were killed and 150 injured in Israeli airstrikes across Lebanon over 24 hours. Evangelos Sipsis reports.
But what we've seen lately is heavy airstrikes in the southern part of Lebanon. We've seen a lot of military air force from Israel targeting over 150 positions that they believe are Hezbollah targets with drones and airstrikes, and this continuation of the ground operation, which they have called limited and localized. But what is quite interesting is that there have been announcements of more places to evacuate, and it's interesting to point out which areas are those. The IDF have mentioned that places all the way up to the Avali River, which is northern than the city of Tyre, close to the city of Saida, which is literally 40 minutes a drive from the capital of Beirut. They said that all those areas up until there need to be evacuated, and any coastal area also needs to be evacuated. They haven't given out the reason why it needs to be evacuated, but if we take into consideration what has happened in the past, those areas are more likely to be targeted. And that shows that this limited localized operation by the IDF is going to expand. Now, there has been also a barrage of rockets by Hezbollah overnight, but also on Tuesday towards parts of northern Israel and all the way into Haifa. It's the first time that we have seen Hezbollah targeting Haifa. The situation still remains fluid. There are some strikes. There is this expansion, let's say, of conflict between the two sides, and all that as the IDF, the Israelis have come out to say that the next successor of Hezbollah, which was Hashem Safieddin, is dead. There hasn't been any confirmation by Hezbollah, but that's what the Israeli side said. And if that is true, then we might be seeing a different approach when it comes to either the military operations, but also any talks about ceasefire.
That was Evangelos Sipsis reporting from Beirut. Meantime, the Pentagon says Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has postponed a trip to the United States scheduled for this week, delaying a planned meeting with his U.S. counterpart, Lloyd Austin. Israel's Enet news outlet reports it was a last-minute decision made by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who insists he must have a call with the U.S. President Joe Biden and a cabinet approval of Israel's response to Iran before the trip can be made. Jonathan Regev has more from Tel Aviv.
The United States is concerned with what Israel may do, especially when it comes to Iran. We will certainly hear from the American host that the United States is thoroughly committed to Israel's security, that the United States will stand together with Israel against any Iranian aggression. And I think we can definitely say that until now, the United States, the American administration, has backed its words with actions. The United States stood along with Israel against the Iranian attacks coming last week and last April. The United States was there. But the Americans are clearly concerned with what Israel may do in its action in Iran. The last thing the United States would want is an Israeli action towards the Iranian nuclear sites. Just 4 weeks ahead of the U.S. elections. The last thing, along with a strike on the nuclear sites that the Americans would want to see, is a strike on the Iranian oil facilities, which would send the oil prices far, far up. We're already seeing that the prices are already rising just from the concern that an attack might come. There will be a lot of backing for Israel, but also a lot of concern and a lot of suggestions for Israel to make sure that Israel understands the American needs at this time.
That was Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. In North America, Florida is bracing for another hurricane less than 2 weeks after Hurricane Helene ripped through the state's Big Bend region and impacted homes along its Gulf Coast. Hurricane Milton is currently a Category 5 storm and has taken direct aim at the heavily populated Tampa Bay region. Nita Soledad-Perez reports on how communities are preparing.
Mandatory evacuations are now in effect for low-lying areas along Florida's Gulf Coast as one of the most powerful hurricanes in the state's history approaches. Florida highways are experiencing heavy traffic, as state officials anticipate this could be the largest evacuation since Hurricane Irma in 2017. The storm arrives as many residents are still recovering from Hurricane Helene, which hit just 12 days ago.
But obviously the bigger issue this time for us to deal with is going to be the wind, that's going to be coming through, given its closeness to us and directness of this. We've got a lot of people that put a lot of stuff on their front yards, and all this stuff is just wind fodder that's going to just be blowing down the street and hitting who knows what.
Authorities are scrambling to remove as much of that debris as possible, worried Milton will transform it all into hazardous projectiles.
We have taken on this debris mission to supplement the local governments in areas like Pinellas and Manatee, which saw a lot of debris left over for Hurricane Helene. Local officials, private contractors, continue the debris removal mission. Our folks are going to continue to work 24/7. Our executive order requires the landfills to be open 24/7.
Airports, schools, and universities within the storm's projected path will close starting Wednesday. The Tampa area has not faced a storm of this magnitude in over a century. Hurricane Helene made landfall 160 kilometers north of Tampa Bay, resulting in a historic storm surge for the region. Many homes were destroyed and at least 14 lives were lost. South Florida is receiving many of the evacuees from the storm's path. The back-to-back hurricanes are challenging both Florida's and the Federal Emergency Management Agency's capacities to respond to simultaneous disasters.
That was Nita Soledad-Perez reporting on Hurricane Milton. Finally, in Africa, Nigeria has started an initiative which allows local refineries to purchase crude oil using the naira instead of foreign currency. The government's aim is to strengthen demand for the local currency and reduce its depreciation. Keqiang reports from Abuja.
Nigeria, the leading oil producer in Africa, continues to struggle with petroleum product imports, driving up prices and further weakening the local currency. The Oil for Naira program seeks to change this by facilitating domestic oil transactions in naira. The move could inject liquidity into the naira, reduce dependency on foreign exchange, and stimulate investments in the oil sector. Local refineries, including the 650,000-barrel capacity Dangote refinery, will now be able to purchase crude oil in naira. This could help ease domestic fuel costs, which have skyrocketed by more than 500% since the removal of subsidies. Experts also predict this shift could generate more foreign income in the long run.
We already have a local investor. We already have a refinery that has the capacity to not only meet our domestic needs, but actually even, help us to start earning forex. Whatever that refinery is going to be producing, based on his naira purchase, will be sold in forex when it is being shipped outside Nigeria.
While the Oil for Naira program offers a fresh approach to stabilizing Nigeria's economy, experts are closely watching how it will impact foreign exchange liquidity. Experts also highlight the need for strict regulation to ensure the program is implemented smoothly. Nigeria's heavy reliance on oil to generate foreign exchange raises questions about how sectors dependent on forex will fare under this program. Yet, with effective oversight and regulation, many believe the policy could help secure a more stable and self-sufficient economy.
That was Keqiang reporting. Now, recapping the headlines, North Korea says it will completely cut off roads and railways connected to South Korea starting from Wednesday. Southeast Asian leaders have gathered in the capital of Laos for an annual regional forum, and Israel continues to expand its ground offensive against Hezbollah, deploying a 4th Army Division into southern Lebanon. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Xi Zhi. Thanks for listening.